Netherborne, the Ancient Devourer. Chapter 31. Overwhelming power is fun. My phone is out of battery. All the anticipation shifted to anger. Ask your friend then, Victor hissed with unconcealed rage. Yo, John, can you search if a man called Victor Harrison died? No, I am not a mob boss. No, I didn't kill him. Just search for it, you idiot. Ah, give it here. Sound of rustling and a few grunts. Boss, was this Victor Harrison guy a famous singer? No. Politician? No. Scientist? No, he was a nobody living in London. What's a London? A city in the United Kingdom, a country. Use that in the search. Okay, time stretched on for a while before he answered. Yup, nothing. Victor had no idea how to take the information. Did that mean he was still alive or dead? He wasn't famous when he was alive, so it made sense if his death didn't appear on the front page of Google. Can you search a death registry? Boss, I'll be honest, I only learned what Google was yesterday. I ain't got a bloody clue how to use this thing. Victor had honestly had enough of this subordinate. Although he had a lot of points to spend, wasting any more on this pointless conversation irked him. All right, never mind then. Stay safe. I may come to visit you sometime. He didn't wait for the moron's response and hung up. Even if that idiot gets captured by the US government, it should be fine. If he can survive being reduced to atoms, then what can Earth scientists do to him? Then, with a sigh, he schemed the endless grey dunes. If Victor woke up here, he would have thought he had traveled back in time before the dinosaurs, when the whole planet was covered in volcanoes and seas of lava. But he knew where he was, underground in a magical dome that made no fucking sense with dragons above and unknown biomes and creatures below. Well, that phone call was useless. But, in a way, the fact it was inconclusive gave him some peace of mind. Dead or not, he was here now, and he might as well make the most of it until Terry worked out how his darn phone worked. Victor winced when he saw that he had spent over 1 million stat points on that conversation. It's fine. I have another 60 million in the bank and plenty more monsters to slaughter. But that was for another time. He needed to let the silly, fleshy beings take a well-deserved rest right now. Or I could. Go ahead. There is really no need to wait for them. He looked below his feet that hovered a meter above the grey sand. A depression in the sand showed the presence of his favorite pet. There was something special about Wiggles. Perhaps it was because he reconstructed him from the ground up, giving Wiggles a much stronger connection to him than all his other undead. It also helped that Wiggles didn't have great intelligence, and it actually obeyed all his commands to the best of its ability. Unlike his human undead, who all seemed to mess up his orders on purpose or through sheer incompetence. Wiggles, go venture to the next floor and keep going. Keep me posted through the mental link on anything interesting. Wiggles was on par with a senior dragon in strength. Apart from the harsh environments, the monsters were numerous but relatively weak individually. Except that Leviathan we encountered a few floors ago. The funny thing is Wiggles is far larger, so when he swam through the ocean floors, the Leviathans avoided him as if he was the ocean's apex predator. When Wiggles was underground or only showed the tip of his head, it was hard to appreciate how titanic and menacing he was. But with the ocean allowing for a full view, his neon green flesh and enormous circular mouth lined with rows of human-sized teeth made him look like some kind of eldritch horror awoken from the darkest depths. The ground rumbled, and Victor watched as grey dunes crumbled and boulders scattered as the earthworm made its way to the tower in the distance. Although we set ourselves up halfway across this floor, it will take Wiggles a full day at maximum speed to reach the next tower. Due to the insane distance between each floor's tower and the fact it was only increasing, Victor was starting to doubt if the stories of delvers making it to the last floor were true. For a normal human to get as far as we have, it would have taken at least a year. And that wasn't even the main issue. Genus mentioned that human-made products only lasted so long in the monorich environment before degrading. So how would a delving party get past the first 20 floors without a food supply? The graveyard floors had swamps but absolutely nothing with any meat or fruits. The ocean floors had edible sea monsters but only seawater to drink. Victor thought about Alice. He suspected she was currently at a decent level for a human to reach, and she survived a few days without food and water and seemed fine upon waking up. Back on Earth, a human would die after 3 days without drinking water, but she was only a little parched. Is that the effect of mana or stat points? Perhaps she invested a lot of points in her con stat? But even with the help of skills, I don't see how it's possible, unless there's a class specializing in assisting a delving party during long trips. He chuckled at the thought of a person whose sole job was to conjure food and water out of mana. Ha ha ha, a food mage. They must exist. He added the quest to confirm if food mages were real to his ever-growing list of plans to interact with humans or visit a human city. Well, once I conquer this dungeon, I'm going to head back to the surface, shove a doom ray up any dragon's arse that opposes me, and put that genus fellow on the throne, and if he doesn't do as I say, he can have a doom ray up his arse, too. Victor almost shook in excitement. If the first 20 floors gave him 60 million stat points, what would his stat sheet say after the 100th floor? Maybe I could destroy the planet with a maximum power doom ray with all my points shoved into it. That's a scary thought. Honestly, at this point, his falling stats problem was almost laughable. Assuming he encountered no more issues, he should have centuries of life force by the end of this dungeon. Then he would have time to explore the world and find a permanent solution, if one existed. Maybe this new life ain't so bad after all. Victor chuckled as he went to find his minions. Wait, my minions. A cold feeling rippled in his chest. The phrase "it's lonely" at the top played through his mind. Okay, add making some companions to my growing list. But, to be fair, he had only been in this world a few months and had killed almost everything he had come across so far. Just another reason to interact with civilization soon. Should I put more effort into my avatar and use it to adventure with Alice? Or perhaps I could use an undead as my emissary? Alas, these were questions for the future, a future that looked a lot brighter with every passing day. Who would have thought having overwhelming power could be this fun? Chapter 32. Return of the Delving Team advertisement. The frost-covered ground crunched underfoot as the party probed deeper into the cursed forest. After the incident with the corrupted, half a month had passed, and after much convincing from the higher UPS, the party was back together with a new mission provided by the head of the Delvers Guild. Investigate the necromancer in the cursed forest. Reward, 50 gold per party member. Remember, Sam. Eve turned to the timid hacker. If we encounter that corrupted horseman or any other corrupted, we are to engage in conversation first. She flicked Sam's ear, and he yelped. I know you hackers hate diplomacy, but sometimes it's needed, all right? Not everything should be killed on sight. Yes, yes. Sorry, Sam muttered as he dragged his feet. Rock, the gem golem from God knew where, loomed protectively over Sam while Zed scouted on ahead. The rogue businessman was a mere blur of shadow and smoke as he maneuvered between the naked trees. The group had been traveling for a few days but had encountered nothing. And that was weird. Zed, are there really no monsters for miles around? Where did they all go? A rush of wind made Eve shiver slightly as Zed appeared next to her. Her bikini armor was great, legendary even, but it sucked during the cold weather, and she couldn't even wear a coat over it. Otherwise, its special defensive effects failed to activate. It really was a bizarre piece of armor in that regard. Nothing. Tracks are all weeks or even months old. I found a few rotting corpses but couldn't discern what killed most of them. Even the insects are all dead. It's as if a wave of death passed through the area. Zed ran a white-gloved hand through his hair and frowned. But, I am detecting a large gathering of mana south of here. About another few hours of travel. South. Eve also frowned. Apart from delving into the Empire's dungeon, they had gone on multiple missions in this cursed forest, but nothing of note was ever in the south, as it was the furthest point from the grand dungeon controlled by the dragons in the north. Is the necromancer there? Perhaps he's terrified of encroaching on the dragon's territory, so they stay far away. Plausible. But strange. Zed shook his head and dusted off his hands. Nothing makes any sense. Some monster corpses look like they suffered heart attacks and just fell over where they stood, eyes still open in shock. In contrast, a few S-rank monsters have deep gashes from claws that could have belonged to a castle-size werewolf. S-rank monster corpses. Eve's eyes practically had money bags in them. Where can we sell them? Zed chuckled. Absolutely not. They are all destroyed beyond recognition. It would be far too much effort. But, funnily enough, the S-rank monster corpses are in better condition than others I found. I don't even know what rank these corpses are, but they were reduced to burned lumps of unrecognizable flesh. They were so burned and destroyed that I don't know how they died. My only guess would be some kind of lightning magic or stupidly high-tier fire magic. Eve deflated and let out a sigh. I will never pay off this darn debt. Stupid Empire tax laws. Now. All is not lost. Zed turned to the south. I think we will find something very interesting soon enough. Nothing could have prepared the group for what they found. Goddess, am I dreaming? Eve muttered over and over again. She bent down and scrutinized the wooden sign. 4-leaf golden bear. She looked between the sign and the ice sculpture. Well, sculpture was the wrong term. It's the real bloody thing. A perfectly preserved 4-leaf golden bear. Its beautiful golden fur, 4 muscular arms, and ivory teeth were all there. Eve's eyes darted around the hundreds of ice sculptures that surrounded her. Each one could pay back her debt, and there were hundreds. She felt like a kid in a candy store. There's an S-rank silver bear over here. Zed paused, and 2 black blades materialized in his gloved hands. We aren't alone. Sam gripped his staff tighter and looked around as Rock maneuvered to stand over him. The gem golem's presence gave the hacker some confidence, but Sam stayed diligent. Although he commanded great power, he was weak and lacked defensive capabilities. One stray arrow to the face cared little if Sam could manipulate the system. However, he did wear many expensive defensive artifacts for this very reason. His power was preventive rather than reactive. A tiny skeleton wandered between the sculptures carrying a basket filled with fruits. It gave them one look, and they all stiffened. A few seconds passed with nothing happening. The tension was so high the air was practically shuddering from it. Nut, the skeleton asked and held one out. It was called a winter pine, a bad-tasting nut surrounded by a hard shell that peasant villagers harvested during the winters to survive. Nobody moved. No nut? Okay. The skeleton put the winter pine back in the basket and wandered off. The adamantite delver party looked between each other as if they had all seen a ghost. Finally, Eve reached over with her muscular arm and slowly forced Sam's arm down since he had raised his wooden staff and was shaking. A corrupted, Sam whispered under his breath. It just walked away. He followed the undead's path to the left of an ice sculpture. That has never happened before. As a hacker employed by the Empire, he had seen his fair share of corrupted beings that should not exist and must be purged. The undead always attacked without question. So why was this one different? Was Master wrong? His face then went pale as he realized another weird point. It talked. That it did. Zed slowly walked in front of the group with his daggers resting by his sides. Their long, curved blades gleamed in the midday sun as he twirled them around, something he did when nervous. Do we follow? Eve hesitated. The mission provided by the guild was to investigate the forest, but so long as they all agreed to keep this incident secret, they could have Rock carry a few of these ice statues back to the Empire, and they would be set for years. Just selling the silver bear alone would clear Eve's debts, and she could purchase a house in the capital. It was tempting. But a part of her wanted to know. Why? Why was this happening? Let's follow. Keep teleportation artifacts at the ready, Eve said, and everyone nodded. She wasn't the team leader, but they all listened to the frontliner. If she didn't want to go, then nobody could. Zed vanished in a puff of smoke, and Eve kept close to Sam and Rock. They advanced slowly through the ice sculptures, eyes peeled for a potential ambush. I think that skeleton was a goblin, Sam mentioned quietly. We saw many empty goblin camps on the way here. Perhaps the necromancer took them all here. But what for? Eve whispered as they shuffled along, careful not to damage any ice sculptures. The forest has been completely cleared out. Some monsters were preserved here in ice sculptures, and now there are signs of intelligent goblins. Is the necromancer planning for an invasion? Are they goblins working in mines near here to make weapons? This was becoming more serious. The undead horseman had accused them of trespassing on his owner's land, but that was many miles to the north. We could be about to uncover an undead army. Is that the mana Zed said he had located? As the group left the grouping of ice sculptures, they came across a clearing. In the center was a group of very worn-down merchant carriages. Lounging outside the carriages around a stone slab with playing cards spread on its surface were two men wearing very torn-up and dirty merchant clothes. They both turned to the approaching group. "Hey, Toby, you know them," one of the merchants said to the other. Toby lifted his hat from over his eyes and scanned the group. They seem familiar. Andrew, but I can't put my finger on it." He shrugged and returned to the stone slab they used as an improvised table. "It's your turn, Andrew." Zed appeared in a puff of smoke next to Eve and whispered, "They are strong." "Give a reference point," Eve hissed back. Everything was strong in this forest. Weaker than that undead horseman we faced before, but about as strong as an A-grade monster? My threat detecting skills are being partly blocked by something. Zed hid his blades behind his back and walked a bit forward. "Greetings, gentlemen. We are an adamantite delving team here on orders from the guild master. We would appreciate it if you could explain all of this." He gestured around at the many ice sculptures and why there are talking undead goblins. A few goblins littered the clearing, some carrying things while the others were lying on the ground and watching the clouds pass by. "Why should we?" Toby grumbled under his hat as he set a few cards on the stone to counter. "Andrew's recent move. You invade our land and demand things of us? This is the cursed forest, not your shitty empire." He spat some green gunk to the side and huffed. Eve stepped forward and politely pushed the rapidly angering businessman to the side before he assassinated the merchant. "We don't mean to be rude or cause harm. We previously ran into an undead horseman, and due to a misunderstanding, there was a fight." "Oh." Andrew answered this time, clearly interested. "You met Henry, then? Is that bastard still alive?" Yes." "Classic." Andrew frowned as he threw a set of 3 cards onto the table. "And we are just left here. Forgotten." "Shut it," Toby murmured. "We will get in trouble." "Trouble with who?" Sam asked from the back. His voice was small, but in the brief silence, it carried weight. For the zombie merchants, it was unmentionable; for the delvers, it was their most important question. As the silence became too much, Toby turned to the carriage and hollered, "Bob, come out here for a second." A minute of tense silence followed. Toby stood up, and everyone shifted nervously. He snorted and went into the carriage and re-emerged with a small skeleton. However, this one was more human-looking than the goblin but still very short. "Hello," the skeleton said with a surprisingly deep voice, but its posture and tone gave everyone the impression of depression. His voice lacked effort, and his head was hung low. "That's your leader." Zed's danger-detecting skills were screaming at him. "Hey!" Toby looked between the group and then Bob and chuckled. "No, he is our chef. You must have traveled far. Care to stay for a meal?" The group looked among themselves. They were all on the edge and nervous, but they needed information. What better way than over a meal? "Cook!" Rock thundered from behind after being silent for the entire conversation. "We can cook together." "Sure," Bob murmured as he turned to head back into the carriage. "We can cook outside." "Good." The ground trembled as the titanic gem golem wandered over and plopped himself beside the carriage. Eve licked her lips. "That sounds good, but I must ask, are those ice sculptures for sale?" "Perhaps." Toby smiled. "To the right person, they might be." Chapter 33. Zombie Merchants. "So you wanted to talk?" Toby said as he propped his head up with one arm on the stone table and browsed the cards he fanned out in his other out of Andrew's sight. His eyes darted between his hidden hand of cards and the cards Andrew had just thrown onto the table. "Yes," Eve said politely and straightened her back. "We have many questions." "Well, fire away." Toby casually tossed 2 cards onto the table, and Andrew frowned. Toby was the type of man you wouldn't want to cross at night and starkly contrasted to Andrew, who was more belly than man. Andrew shifted his various cards between his sausage fingers. "Ugh, I give up." He tossed his hand of cards onto the table, and Toby just grinned. He was guaranteed victory. "That's my 20th win in a row, Andrew. It's getting boring now." Andrew shrugged and turned to the recently arrived guests. Compared to a shitty card game that Toby had invented and kept changing the rules of, talking to an adamantite delving team was far more exciting. Eve took that as an opportunity. "We were tasked to find a necromancer in the cursed forest. Know anything about that?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Although Andrew and Toby tried to hide it well with extra clothes and hats, the undead stench was unavoidable. "Can't answer." Toby laughed. "To call that thing a mere necromancer feels like calling a dragon a fire lizard or a noble a money grubber. It's technically true, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. But sure, there was a necromancer here recently." "Hold on." Zed tightened his grip on his dagger under the table. "Why would you tell us this? It doesn't make sense." "Actually, none of this makes sense." "Tell me about it." Toby gestured between the two of them. "We have no idea what's going on, either. One day we were on a jolly old trip to the Empire, and the next thing we know, we are in eternal servitude to some eldritch creature and abandoned here." Andrew interjected, "Got any alcohol, by the way?" "We ran out long ago." Zed relaxed a little, hesitantly brought out a silver flask, and passed it to the zombie merchant. Andrew took the flask with his grubby fingers, sniffed it, and then downed it all in one go. "Good stuff that, thanks." "You're welcome." Zed took back the flask and brushed off the filth with a handkerchief. "So you encountered this necromancer, and he is an eldritch creature?" "Not a human." "Not a human," they both said. Toby added, "Spoke like one, though, although I'm not sure what a creature like that is supposed to sound like since I have never met one before. Maybe it ate a human and copied its brain or something." "Ooh, that might be true," Andrew said. "Anyway, that thing is not around anymore. So why don't you escape?" Eve pointed out, but then felt stupid as the 2 zombies stared at her with rotting skin. "Never mind, this is likely the best place to stay. It's bloody boring, though." Andrew sighed and scratched his arse. Being a zombie fucking sucks as well. Can't sleep, the constant hunger for flesh. He quickly raised his hands. "It's manageable." The main issue is how our bodies degrade over time. I wonder if we will eventually be like Bob. What's up with him? Was he a midget or something? Sam asked as he eyed the skeleton and rock cooking up some kind of abomination over a fire. Also, how do you guys still speak? Forgive me if I am being rude, but zombies usually aren't the brightest bunch. None taken. We understand we are rather unique. Toby pulled his hat down further over his eyes. Bob over there was a mighty fine dwarf and the best darn chef I ever had the pleasure of traveling with. But that monster took something away from him, something I don't think he will ever get back. He looked into the distance as if having a whimsical moment. Nobody dared to interrupt him. As a giant man with muscles that rivaled Eve's, it was best to leave him alone. So, Eve said after a while. About the ice sculptures. You said they were for sale? Really? The two zombie merchants exchanged a look and a slight nod. Sure, Andrew replied, flashing a grin on his fat face. The thing told us to rest up before leaving. It's been weeks, and our master is yet to return. The merchant rubbed his hands together. I am sure he won't mind us selling some of the collection. In fact, I will give you guys a great deal. Buy one, get one free. Andrew pushed himself off the floor, which took far more effort than necessary, and waddled toward the sculptures. Come. While we wait for food, let's discuss some business. 2 days had passed, and Victor decided it was time to move on. Wiggles had confirmed that the next 2 floors consisted of a similar desert biome, so there was little reason to remain stationary. Apart from letting Genus get some beauty sleep. Master. A voice sounded in the back of his head, and Victor instantly concentrated. It wasn't a voice he was familiar with like Henry's or Terry's, so who could it be? Entering the black ocean within his mind, Victor looked across to the black waters to the south and saw a group of 3 blinding lights surrounded by hundreds of smaller flecks of lights. Ah yes, the group of merchants and goblins I left at the old camp. I totally forgot about them. He didn't really care for them all that much, so he was surprised they reached out to him. I expected them to run away or something. Yes, he responded. It took a second due to the distance, as he didn't invest many stat points into the message. From the call with Terry, he had discovered that there was a flat life force fee for every message he sent, similar to how old phone contracts worked. However, he could shove additional stat points into the message to have it arrive faster, which he did when talking to Terry. Otherwise, he would have had to wait days between messages. But for these insignificant subordinates, he didn't wish to waste more points than he needed. Sure, 60 million points is a lot, but it's better to hold on to them than needlessly waste them. Master, it's Andrew. One of the zombie merchants. Sorry to bother your excellency, but an adamantite delving party has arrived. We are currently buying time while playing cards, but they are demanding answers about a necromancer and also want to purchase the sculptures. What should we do? If we all combine our strengths, we could maybe drive them off, but what if they come again? With more people? The zombie rambled on and only stopped once Victor interjected. Delving team? Did they mention anything about encountering a horseman? Oh yes, they did. It seems the delving party came in peace this time. They did mention something about Henry. Okay. Keep details about me vague, but overall you can say as much as you want until they are satisfied. For the ice sculptures, I don't care about them all that much, so you can keep 10% of any money you make from them and save the rest for me. I may need some currency to work with at a later date. Okay, Master. Will do. Also, may I request that we can pick which monster to be merged with? Explain. Well, you have all these preserved corpses, so couldn't we be combined with one of them like you did with Henry? I want to be strong but not turn into, well, you know, Bob. Victor paused. Why hadn't he thought of that earlier? Sure, the delving team appearing in the north was a rather pressing matter. Still, he could have gained 2 more useful subordinates like Henry, instead of abandoning them back at that camp. In fact, he needed them and the goblins to join him in this dungeon somehow, or did he? He was currently stuck down here, so having representatives on the surface would be perfect. All right, here's the plan. While I make my way down the Grand Dungeon's floors and take over the dragons, your and Toby's job is to conquer the surface. All of the southern section of the Cursed Forest is for your use. Sell the monster corpses, pick the 2 you want to be merged with, and then put the goblins to work however you wish. Build mines, a town, roads, and infrastructure. Anything to make you money. You 2 can keep a third of all the money you make. Then, if you have done a satisfactory job, I will promote you both by merging you with a monster as I did with Henry. Understand? Victor could practically hear the excitement in Andrew's voice. Why yes, my lord. We will not disappoint you. The connection fizzled out, and Victor smiled to himself. Meeting those merchants had been a significant turn in his fortune. He now had 2 savvy businessmen working for him on the surface while he conquered the depths. Eventually, he would combine the 2 empires and rule over the entire cursed forest. But first, we need to get moving. Victor floated over to where Genus was resting. In typical dragon fashion, he had chosen to slumber in a dormant volcano. Victor peered down over the edge of the volcano and could practically see the mana swirling around the dragon. Genus was at the epicenter like a castle-size funnel with scales as if he was a mana black hole. He looked healthier, and some of the weight he had lost over the past few days had been regained. Victor noticed a pile of grey slugs in the sand by his mouth, so Genus had clearly been eating recently. Perhaps I will leave him for 1 more day as the dragons are still a few floors behind, and I will need him in top shape to continue. He had changed his mind about the Grand Dungeon. It was no longer a race to the bottom but rather a marathon. He had forgotten how vulnerable fleshy bodies were. Although he could race ahead and reach the bottom a few days or weeks earlier, so what? So long as the dragons weren't hot on his trail and there were monsters to kill, he had all the time in the world. But he was now a little bored with Genus sleeping in nothing but grey sand in all directions. I wonder what Alice is up to? Chapter 34. Girl Meets Void. Victor floated to where he had left Alice, but she was missing. It was not a massive deal as she couldn't have gone far, and he could track her location via the undead dragon she was using as a mount, but it raised a valid point of concern. A part loathed his lack of control, but another part made a decision. I want friends, not slaves. We aren't in a relationship together, so there's no need for me to be so controlling. If she wants to leave, she is her own person. No reason for me to do anything. Unlike Genus, with whom he had business and had somewhat submitted to his control, Alice was free-spirited and simply his pet project. He did have uses for her, but they mainly required her to stay alive. Consulting his undead network, Victor located the Dragon Mount and headed an hour's flight to the west. As she came into view on the horizon, Victor was amazed. Around 2 meters above a grey dune, a being of pure darkness similar to himself floated around in the air. From the being's figure and long black hair, he could tell the thing was Alice. A sheen of void coated her skin like a latex suit as she hurled balls of void magic at a group of sandworms below. They were hideous things, similar to Wiggles, but a dull grey in color and far smaller. They also had a more slug-like appearance rather than armored scales. When the void balls struck the creatures, it was like they were deleted from existence. Whatever the ball touched simply ceased to exist until it dissipated a few meters later, caving a deep tunnel into the sand that was quickly refilled, and the dune dropped in height by a little. As Victor got closer, Alice whipped her head around and stared at him with a spear of void in one hand and a ball of nothingness in the other. She then seemed flustered and averted her eyes, pretending something was behind him. "You can see me?" Victor questioned. His voice was softer than usual but held a questioning tone that made Alice shiver. Alice seized up and choked out, "Why yes." Her hands were on her chest, and she tried to make herself look smaller by curling her legs. "Since when?" "Since I woke up." She dispelled her magic and slowly floated to the ground, her feet lightly landed on the top of the zombie dragon, and she nervously played with her fingers and twiddled her thumbs while staring at the ground. Her mouth opened and closed a few times as if a question was on the tip of her tongue, but she failed to say it each time. "Spit it out." "I won't be mad," Victor tried to console her, but it came out harsher than he expected. He hadn't tried to sound empathetic in months and wasn't the most social person back on Earth. He could hold conversations without issue, but actually caring about the other person was a different step, and the dulled emotions that came with his new body didn't help. "So, I got a new class." Alice shifted on her feet and slowly looked up. Her pink eyes gazed curiously at where Victor floated. "It's called Servant of the Void, a legendary class. You, may not know, but legendary classes are only given out due to special circumstances, such as hero classes when humanity is facing a great threat that the goddess needs champions to deal with." She took a deep breath and blurted out, "You are a creature from the void, aren't you? Otherwise, there's no way I would receive such a class." Victor cancelled out his stealth skill. To Alice, the large shadow suddenly materialized and was far more menacing than she expected. He was huge, towering over her and blocking out the fake sky. Unfortunately, she likely only reached up to his knees, so she had to strain her neck to take in his complete form. Many blue eyes shifted around within a swirling mass of darkness and looked at her from every angle. Alice gulped as her eyes traced one of his arms and saw the curved claws that were meter-long blades of black metal. Victor tilted his featureless face and peered through the rising smoke that was his body's life force battling the dense mana in the dungeon. "I never planned to hide it from you. I just felt the time to reveal myself hadn't come." He leaned closer, and to Alice's credit, she didn't shy away and held his gaze. "So, Servant of the Void, did I meet your expectations?" "Very much so." Alice furiously nodded. Mana crept through her veins and channeled into her eyes. Victor watched in amazement as her pupils dilated and became swirling abysses. He felt her gaze pass over him and shivered slightly as if he was naked. "What is that?" he couldn't help but ask. Nothing had ever made him feel so exposed. "A new skill I got called Void Eye," Alice answered with a sweet smile. "Not sure what it does, as the system is being unhelpful as usual, but it has the word void in the name, so I thought testing it out on you would yield some results." "And does it?" "Kinda. I can see you more clearly, it gets rid of the smoke that shrouds you, but that's about it." Alice shrugged, turned the skill off, and rubbed her eyes. "Makes my eyes darn itchy, though." She plopped on her butt and looked up, using her hands to prop herself up. So indeed," Victor replied with amusement. "Do you feel hollow inside?" she asked and watched his featureless face for any reaction. "Like a gnawing hole eating away at you?" "Always." Victor had attributed that feeling to his race, but perhaps it came with being one with the void. But that raised many questions. Why would being a void creature cause a hollow feeling, a lack of emotions, a desire to kill? What did void even mean? He was no philosopher, but perhaps having a deeper understanding of the element that governed his life could lead to extraordinary discoveries. But as these thoughts clouded his mind, something took over and moved them aside. Victor was only half aware of what had happened but knew it had happened again. "Something is messing with my mind. Whenever I try to think deeply about my reincarnation or identity, something diverts my thinking." Alice seemed to notice it and activated her Void Eye skill again. She traced his body and frowned. "Something just invaded and then left. It was like a wave of power washed over you and vanished as quickly as it came." "From which direction?" Victor asked as he looked around. His many eyes scoured the dunes in all directions. Alice pointed upward. "From above, for sure." Okay, whenever that happens, let me know and keep a tally. This is the... Victor tried to count on his fingers, but no matter how perfect his new body's memory was, he just couldn't remember. All right, this is bad. I can't even remember how bad the problem is. He hovered closer to Alice. Please keep track and let me know when it happens again. Alice bobbed her head. Will do. She put up her thumb and gave him a reassuring smile. Master. Victor shook his head as he loomed over the subservient girl. Although the proclamation was correct, she was far inferior to him, even her class servant of the void reflected that fact. But he didn't want any more slaves or servants. He could have hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions bow their heads and listen to his every word with fierce loyalty. But the idea honestly scared him. He felt that feeling wash over him again, and Alice nodded to him to confirm she had noticed it. If whatever was controlling him didn't want him to make friends and instead mindlessly slaughter, he would do the exact opposite. It was time to make allies. No. Your class may call you a servant, but you are a potential friend to me. An ally I can depend on. In any other situation, Victor may have cringed at such words flowing out of his mouth. But the power dynamic here was far to the extreme to go about it the usual way. Even if Alice was insane enough and thought of asking to be friends with a void creature that could slay dragons with ease, she would never ask. Her class insisted she was a servant, so she would obey her destined role. Residents of this world treated the system as an all-knowledgeable entity, including Alice. She saw it as her destiny if it proclaimed her as a servant. Alice seemed stupefied by his offer of friendship, but something broke her out of her stunned state. She read a screen in the air that Victor couldn't see, and a massive smile emerged on her face. She looked up at him and said words that would change her life. Chapter 35. A unique friendship. No, Alice said as she moved the blue screens to the side. Then, before Victor could reply, she put her hands on her hips and proclaimed, "You still think of me as a tool, don't you?" She smiled. "And that is understandable. We haven't talked all that much, after all. It's like back in Eshnar when I worked for my dad's auction house. He made friends with many archmages because he would provide them better seats at auctions." She raised her finger at Victor. "But what would happen to their friendship if my dad lost his job or fell ill? Would the archmages that called my father a friend come and visit him at the hospital or help support his family like a true friend? No. They are friends due to business, and that's not real friendship." Victor was left stunned. Whatever the screen had told her was right. Although Victor wanted to become friends with Alice, it was done with a business mindset. He wouldn't have considered a potential friendship if she had ceased being useful to him. "I don't know anything about Alice, nor much about her personality, likes, or dislikes. Yet I declared during our first full conversation that I wanted to be friends with her? How shallow of me." Alice paused and watched his reaction. Then, seeing he was silently floating there, she continued. "I don't know why, but the system seems eager to hand out class upgrades so long as I hang out with you. But why do I need a class to tell me I am your ally? Instead, we should foster that relationship organically." To say Victor's opinion of Alice had skyrocketed would be an understatement. He knew nothing of her life before she stumbled into the forest as nothing but a skin and bone slave. A part of him looked down on the locals of this world. Although Victor had never seen this world's civilization, he had assumed it was beneath Earth, and therefore everyone here was inferior. "I didn't realize it, but I had been looking down on Alice all this time, and why? Because she has fewer levels? Less life experience? She's from a lower developed world? So I let my ego cloud my judgment, and while justifying friendship in my mind, I was just trying to rope her in to be a glorified pet. So," Alice shouted as she combed back her hair. "What do you think, Mr. Void? Friends?" She struck out her hand and let it hang there. Victor never expected the power that came with an offer from the other party. When he asked to be her friend, it came from a higher power position. It almost felt like giving sympathy, but as Alice stood atop a zombie dragon and demanded an ancient creature from the void to become her friend, Victor felt her determination. He didn't know her aspirations or dreams, but now he wanted to know. Victor used some stat points to condense his body into a smaller size. He never saw a need to before, but this seemed like a good occasion. With the power dynamic between them reversed, he felt silly. Looming over her like some deity and wanted to speak to her more personally. However, as he made his body denser, the rate of mana loss increased exponentially to over 10 a second. He became a ball of black smoke that rose to the sky. Alice watched the transformation through her void eye skill, which removed the smoke from her vision. Even with his condensed form, Victor stood at around 3 meters, but it was far more reasonable than his previous height, allowing him to tower over trees. He reached out a claw, making sure the blade was pointed at the floor. "Friends! Friends!" Alice clasped her hand around the offered limb and carefully shook the claw. "A creature from the void has recognized you as an equal. Do you wish to accept an upgrade to your class and become a friend of the void?" Alice tapped the screen with a grin. This was a far more desirable outcome. Although she didn't need the system to acknowledge her relationship, the fact she had been upgraded from a tool to a friend in the system's eye was good enough for her. "And if I take the class, maybe I will get some cool new skills to foster our friendship," she thought as she summoned the party screen. She wanted to know if her friend's name was still listed as unknown. Name: Alice. Race: Level: 52, level up. STR: 70, Dex: 82, Con: 89, Int: 152, WIS: 146. Slave: Dulled emotions. Name: Victor. Race: Netherborne. Level: 307. STR: 59 million, Dex: 59 million, Con: 59 million, Int: 59 million, WIS: 59 million, Life Force Unstable, 16,388 hours, Mana Sickness. Name: Terry. Error: Connection lost. Netherborne. Alice looked up at Victor. He had reverted back to his original form and towered over her. "I have heard of your kind before." "Oh." Victor replied with interest. The goddess told him Netherborne were the most powerful undead in existence when he picked the race. However, he knew nothing of its history or reputation. "What do you know about the Netherborne?" "Well, Victor," Alice answered cheerfully after discovering his name, "tales of the Netherborne are told to us as bedtime stories and proclaimed at church services." She stroked her chin while looking at Victor. "Netherborne are portrayed as the ultimate evil and the epitome of destruction. But they are exactly that, a simple idea, a concept. Nobody has witnessed one and lived to tell the tale." She used her float skill to fly up and somewhat match Victor's head level. "So I must be the first person in history to see your kind. And I must say, although you look the part of a continent-annihilating monster, you don't quite match the stories, but they are stories, after all. Can't believe everything we are told, right?" She flew around him in circles while evaluating him. "Continent annihilating." Victor tilted his head to follow her. How could that happen? With the presence of dragons like Hyveth Arkspace and that hacker, surely his kind could never go so far as annihilating an entire continent? How was the Netherborne stopped in the stories? Perhaps if he could know how his ancestors perished, he could avoid a similar fate. Alice chuckled. They weren't. Every few hundred years or so, a cult would succeed in summoning a Netherborne to the mortal plane. They often did it in a location filled with monsters to allow the Netherborne to feast to avoid the chance of it being dealt with early on. So that's why I appeared in the middle of the cursed forest surrounded by a summoning circle and death cultists. But the location seemed long abandoned, so why did I appear there? It happened again. Alice narrowed her eyes as they became swirling abysses and tracked the wave of energy from above. What were you thinking about? The bizarre nature of my arrival here, Victor said with a sigh, and his many blue eyes shifted around. Anyway, how did they die if they weren't killed? Alice rubbed her stomach. They starved, since everyone fled to the oceans and waited for months on large boats. Although some nobles and kings had thought ahead and their families had control over a few islands. And the Netherborne didn't follow them across the ocean. The idea baffled Victor. He could easily float over water. Was that something he could do that other Netherborne couldn't? Well, I don't know if you are unique or different, but Netherborne, like many other corrupted creatures from the void, have an endless hunger for slaughter but also have the intelligence to match. So long as we escaped far into the ocean, the Netherborne never thought or knew how to follow. They would wander the lands, kill everything, and eventually die from starvation, or at least that's what the church taught us. What about the hackers or dragons? Couldn't they stop a Netherborne if they worked together? Yep, they can. Alice nodded her head. The reason even I know so much about Netherborns is that they basically went extinct and are now a legend. Nobody has worried about them for over 1,000 years. Ever since the arrival of the first hackers a millennium ago, the church formed an order called the Hackers Guild, and they have dealt with corrupted entities ever since with ruthless efficiency. So, my void friend, don't go pissing them off, okay? Victor chuckled. Call me Victor. As you wish. Alice activated her skills, and void magic coated her form. She flashed him a grin. So, friend, wanna see the new spells I got from my new class? Chapter 36. Secrets of Void Magic. Even Victor was starting to fear Alice. And that was a good thing. He wanted her to be self-sufficient without his constant protection in the future since, sometimes, he would need her to solve an issue, or he might be off somewhere else. I would say Alice is a weak point of mine, but keeping her alive is much more important than anyone else to me at the moment. Which is a rather sad thing to realize if I think about it. Victor silently floated beside Alice as she annihilated everything in her path. However, he toggled on his annihilating aura while Alice slept and used consume on everything she killed. EXP just didn't seem to have much effect on him compared to the massive benefits it brought her, so it was better she got some more levels. They were making their way through the 30th floor at a record speed. Victor didn't know how far Alice's various skills had leveled, but she even slept with her float skill running and had zero issues zooming around and even keeping up with Genus. The first floor of the Grand Dungeon had been an endless meadow. The following 9 were country-size graveyards overflowing with hordes of undead that reeked of dark attribute mana like a foul stench. Then came the 10 ocean floors, followed by 10 desert biomes of various sand colors ranging from a dull grey to a vibrant purple. A part of Victor really enjoyed those floors due to the unique scenery he had never witnessed on Earth. If not for the dragons finally beginning their chase and Alice's protests at having to eat more sandworms, he would have loved staying a little longer and enjoying the lava beaches. But to be fair, the 30th floor was no better than those previous floors. Endless tunnels and caverns of volcanic rock filled with strange lizards and bats the size of houses attacked them from the shadows and crevices without hesitation like a mindless mob. Thank God for Wiggles, Genus muttered as he flew alongside the pair. If not for this tunnel he made us, it would take years to navigate this place. Victor didn't reply but silently nodded. He had sent Wiggles on ahead while they rested on the desert floors, and the undead earthworm had created a path between each floor's tower. But even with this direct tunnel, it still took a day or so to traverse the immense caves. Victor decided to remain invisible most of the time, but he showed himself to Genus and told him his name was Victor a few floors ago after Alice accidentally let his name slip. Alice, however, had no issue with keeping track of him despite his stealth with her Void Eye skill. Victor hadn't thought about the skill before, but it held deep connotations. Before, he had absolute faith in his stealth skill, but if somehow another person had a similar skill as Alice, he would be discovered before he could attack. But on the flip side, Alice can spot any other void creatures and let me know about them before they kill me, assuming there are any other void creatures on the mortal plane and they aren't all just lurking below. Victor thought back to the phrase ignorance is bliss. Seeing what crept below the world's surface made everything on the surface seem insignificant. He had only caught a glimpse of a fellow void creature, that weird eldritch whale that swam below his cage, and just from that short interaction, he knew that whale could eat Hyveth Arkspace as if she was a mere slug. Currently, Hyveth is the strongest thing I have witnessed on this planet, but now that I think about it, she was living outside the dragon's main stronghold. Was she an outcast or just not powerful enough to be allowed near the dungeon? Again another question was added to his growing list of concerns. Victor was broken from his train of thought as something massive smashed through the tunnel wall. It was a cursed mixture between a bat and a fire lizard. It stood around Genus's height, with red scales and leathery bat wings. However, unlike Genus, its head was that of a bat with a small mouth and beady black eyes. Ugly fucker! Alice shouted as she clapped her hands together. A hairline crack in the world that shouldn't be possible manifested, and the creature was cut cleanly in half down the middle, and the two halves fell apart with a thud. Victor got a perfect view of the creature's anatomy as he felt a small amount of himself vanish. He casually cast consume, and that lost part of himself reappeared. You know, Genus gulped as the group flew over the corpse, that shouldn't be possible, right? Alice innocently hummed a pleasant tune. Whatever do you mean, mighty dragon? She turned to him and grinned, which was rather sinister, with her void mana shield coating her skin and leaving only her eyes and mouth visible. Scared? Of little old me? How cute! Don't mess with me. I have lived a long time, and not even my mother could just clap her hands and erase something from existence. Only a godlike entity can do that, and I've watched you over the past few weeks. Although your growth has been impressive, it shouldn't allow you to do something a 1,000-year-old dragon could only dream of. Okay, relax, old man. Alice had spent a few weeks conversing with the Golden Dragon, and they had gotten closer alongside her improved relationship with Victor. She even agreed to help Genus on his quest to reclaim the Dragon Throne. It all sounded rather grand and exciting. Also, she was never one to turn down free experience points for those that defied her. Victor called her a battle junkie, but she preferred the term pink demon. Or at least that's what Genus had been calling her. Alice decided to humor the dragon as they continued their monotonous task of flying down a straight tunnel for 1,000 miles. You may not know much about human magic or the system. She chuckled. And neither do I, to be honest, but I have found some interesting things recently. She summoned some mana to her hand and watched it dance along her palm. We are told the system is everything, it's what gives us magic and the ability to command the will of the world. But obviously, that's horseshit. You and Victor can use magic without the system's intervention. But I have the system, just a very lackluster version compared to you, Victor countered from the shadows. Alice turned toward where he was with her void eye, which she kept active as much as possible. You told me your system doesn't upgrade your skills when they reach level 10. Should they? Victor checked his list of skills. Almost all of them had reached level 10, but nothing had changed. Yes. Alice nodded. Or at least mine do. This makes me suspect that your version of the system is basically pointless. You also told me that gaining levels and EXP doesn't unlock any new skills or classes like mine. So that begs the question, why? Why do you have a system in the first place? She then pointed at Genus, when Genus doesn't. No offense, but in our terms, you are both creatures, monsters, whatever you want to call it. The system was invented to give us weaker races a chance to fight against you two with magic. What it lets us do, however, is not real magic. Let me demonstrate, she said as she summoned a beautiful orange fireball. The system upgraded this skill when I hit level 10, but I can still use the original spell. Anyway, that's not important. What is this flame made of? She asked and looked between her two students. Mana, Genus replied. Perfect mana, might I add. Although, of course, when I breathe flames, it comes from my body, so the mana has some impurities, but that fireball is near perfect. Exactly, it is made of mana. Alice then seamlessly changed the fireball into a javelin of crystal blue ice. Now. Still mana, Genus said. And perfect again. Alice nodded. Okay, and if I now infuse more of my mana to make this a void element attack, what happens? Mana surged down her arm, and her blessings and class warped that mana to take on the void element. Genus's rainbow eyes shifted as he tracked the mana change and frowned. It's still pure mana, nothing like the feeling I got from the spell you used earlier. I knew it, she exclaimed as she cancelled out the spell with a mere thought. The system just manipulates pure mana into something like fire, ice, or, in this case, void. Now, this raises some questions. Such as, why not let humans use all elements? Why do we need a blessing from spirits or classes? Anyway, I am getting off topic. Genus, you asked how I could clap that fire lizard bat thing to the next life. Genus nodded. Because I used actual magic and not just artificially manipulated mana. Void magic has the property of deleting anything it comes in contact with. Now I'm not 100% sure, but the fake void magic provided by the system constructed from mana shouldn't be able to replicate what I did. But Alice waggled her finger. The system has to honor my class's feature, true damage, which lets me ignore magical defenses, so here's my theory. When I use the new skill I gained recently with my new class, that lets me channel real void magic through Victor and combine it with true damage. The system intervenes and ensures my void magic ignores magical defense. How? She shrugged. I don't know, but it's helpful. Are there any restrictions to that spell? Genus had a slight fear in his voice. Skills and spells that could ignore magical defenses weren't unheard of, but an attack that ignored magical defense and deleted anything it touched? How could he survive such a thing? He was a rather large target, after all. Alice grinned, tore her sights away from Genus, and kept flying down the tunnel. Wouldn't you like to know? She shouted back jokingly. But a girl never reveals her secrets. Victor watched her fly away and thought deeply about what she said. If the system was all a lie, was there a way for him to train his skills? Dragons slept in mana-rich areas to grow in power. Did he have to consume more? No. Consuming never gave me any power UPS. Actually, now that I think about it. Why can't I use void magic? Only shadow magic X is listed in my skills list, but no void magic? What would happen if I just tried to use it? Chapter 37. Ancient Devourer. After reaching level 500, Victor confirmed with almost certainty that the system was a lie, or at least his version was. Yeah, I got nothing. No new class or evolution, Victor shouted as he unleashed a semi-charged doom ray at an enormous intelligent willow tree with a craving for flesh, setting it ablaze. Before encountering this behemoth of a monster, he had started to think he and Alice could deal with anything, but it was only the 50th floor, and they had encountered trouble. The flesh trees, as they had chosen to name them, were resistant to almost every element and could regenerate in seconds. One-shotting them was their only option, but high-powered spells that could instantly kill a tree the size of a skyscraper were few and far between, and when thousands of them populated a continent-size forest, shooting off high-tier spells left and right was not ideal. But they had little choice as the dragons were rapidly approaching, and they needed to keep moving forward. The 50th floor was basically a dense marshland with the occasional open space. Flesh trees of various sizes inhabited the biome. Victor had seen willow trees back on Earth and had always admired the chaotic way their branches grew out, shrouded in dense green leaves that hung down like a depressed teen's haircut. But with the bark black and the leaves a mixture of red and grey, the place had a grim atmosphere. In the far distance, shrouded by fog, Victor could see a towering willow tree-themed tower lined with pulsating red vines like blood vessels, but in their path were flesh trees so tall they touched the top of the floor's dome. One flesh tree must have consumed or concealed the glowstone sun as the place was bathed in total darkness. Nevertheless, the group had managed to travel unmolested for the most part, with Henry riding on the back of the dragon Alice used to use as a mount. Meanwhile, Wiggles happily churned through the flesh tree's exposed roots down below the murky depths of the marshland as Victor, Alice, and Genus flew overhead. As the group passed by the aflame flesh tree from Victor's doom ray, they confronted a literal wall of flesh trees between them and the next floor's tower. I refuse to believe any delving team could get through this, Henry cried from atop the black dragon mount. The blood-red leaves of the closest flesh tree swayed to the side, and the bark split vertically and exposed a wall of sap with a scarlet eye floating in it. The eye that would dwarf Genus turned and stared right at Henry. "Cover him!" Alice called as she put herself between the murderous tree and Henry. But, of course, their lives did not really matter due to them being undead. Still, Victor wished to conserve his stat points where possible, and resurrecting an over-leveled apocalypse horseman and a smashed-up zombie dragon would not be cheap. Before anyone could even react, thousands of black vines coated in toxins erupted from the ground below Henry and clasped around the dragon mount's legs and tail. Alice wasted no time and set the vines alight with the upgraded version of her fireball spell, Hellfire. The dense mana shield that coated the vines evaporated away due to Alice's true damage that ignored the magical defenses and directly burned the vines. The purplish inferno drilled down the vines and spread toward the main body. The ancient flesh tree saw the threat coming, so it used geokinesis to manipulate the terrain and form a physical stone barrier between its burning vines and its main body. The dense mana shield surrounding Alice flickered as her mana reserves bottomed out. Despite leveling into the 90s and investing most of her unspent points into her instat, hurling high-tier magic at trees for days had taken everything out of her. Genus flew below Alice and let her rest for a moment on his back. But, unfortunately, while Alice was out of commission for a moment, the other ancient flesh trees forming the wall between them and the tower had awoken and stared at Genus with their alien eyes. Genus took in a massive gulp of air as his belly inflated and glowed. Golden fire escaped between his teeth before he opened up his maw and unleashed a devastating attack. Golden fire engulfed the thousands of vines rearing to strike, their mana shields flickering under the assault. They shot up, but the majority failed to reach Genus as he tried to fly higher, but eventually, the floor's dome was only a few meters overhead. Despite the immense distance, the vines closed in within seconds. Before they seized Genus, Victor appeared from stealth, severed them all with a swipe from his claws, and froze the tips with freezing cone just for good measure to stop them from regenerating. "Looks like there's no other way," Victor sighed as he began charging up a doom ray at around 10% capacity. A million stat points vanished into the abyss of the spell's fuel. "Is there really no other way we can get through? We have been blasting holes through all the obstacles so far, and that just gives the dragons chasing us a clear path forward, just like the tunnels Wiggles made through the cave floors." So Alice said from atop Genus's back. She had her fly skill active to avoid plunging to her death as she used meditation to rapidly regenerate mana at the cost of her defensive capabilities. Victor used his Black Ocean network and confirmed a dragon noble family was only 3 floors behind. They didn't have to waste any energy on clearing out the monsters and simply followed their trail of destruction, and if Victor blasted these flesh trees to make a city-size hole, the dragons would have another already cleared route to take and gain on them. With a sigh, he continued to charge the spell and aimed it. "What can I do? My skills all rely on assassinating, army building, or total annihilation. These trees have far too much defense for my annihilating aura. and their dense mana shield and bark protect them from my freezing cone and shadow magic. The sky distorted due to the flashing purple lightning that crackled around Victor's extended claw. Mana streams funneled into the spell and began rapidly burning Victor's hand, and his life force surged to defend his body from evaporating. "Fine," Alice said and turned to watch the light show. She ensured her void eye was active as it reduced the world's brightness. 3, 2, 1, Victor counted down for everyone's sake. Fire! He unleashed the spell, and the entire floor became daytime. An arc of purple lightning discharged across the sky. The flesh trees all slammed shut their bark eyelids to protect their vulnerable eyes and deployed their mana shields at maximum power. They lit up like Christmas trees with red mana dancing across their surface. The doom ray blasted into them with the force of a nuke combined with the wrath of Zeus. The entire dungeon floor shuddered as dust plumed into the sky alongside thousands of shards of bark and residual mana. Yet as the smoke cleared, the flesh trees were still standing, and the stadium-size hole in one of them was rapidly closing. "Do we rush it?" Gina said, getting in position to fly through the gap before it closed. "This could be a good chance and give us some room between the dragons and us." "No, stop." Victor looked closely. "Those darn trees didn't even feel a thing." Alice nodded, her mana sight and void eye skills active. "That is an illusion spell, not a real opening. I am willing to bet they used some life-saving skill to avoid that attack, or perhaps they are just that sturdy. Would match up with what we have seen so far." She put her hands on her hips and sighed. "If only you could use void magic." She eyed Victor as he floated there silently. "I mean, you are a creature from the void. How come you can't use it?" Victor prepared another doom ray before the flesh trees recovered and sent more roots. "Alice, we have gone over this. The system is not here to help me. It's here to restrain me. If I can somehow break free of its clutches or regain my true body, I could obliterate these flesh trees without issue. But for now, I will have to work with what I got access to." "Have you recovered?" Alice responded by coating herself in her void armor and floating in the air. "I recovered enough mana to use a few void spells with your help." Then she said, "But the simple fact is those flesh trees are so titanic that a single spell can't take them out in one go, and they regenerate in seconds. Could we use wiggles to sneak under them?" Victor debated the idea, but one check on his undead pet sunk the idea before it could even fly. "Sadly, no. Wiggles is currently fighting the middle flesh tree's roots and is losing. I am expending a lot of life force to regenerate him right now, but it's worth it to keep those roots from attacking us." Victor scanned the surroundings, and after confirming the flesh trees were still recovering, he gestured to Alice. "Create a path through the middle flesh tree's mana shield with a large void. Powered fireball. I will then force my way inside and explode them from within. I believe that the eye is a weak point." Victor then turned to Genus. "Get ready to dive bomb through the gap. This time, it will be a real path, and we can use this to buy us some time. I refuse to believe the dragons hot on our tail can deal with this situation so easily." Genus huffed in agreement as he lacked the energy to respond. They had been up for days at this point, as every inch of these last few floors had been crawling with carnivorous plants that tried to swallow them at every opportunity. From Genus's perspective, Victor vanished, but he could feel the considerable mana fluctuations surrounding the area where he disappeared. Alice directed him with her void eye. "He is approaching the flesh tree's eye very quickly. I'll fire before he gets out of my void link skills range." It was the skill Alice had acquired upon accepting the Friend of the Void class. It allowed her to access some void affinity while Victor was nearby. Everything from then on happened quickly. Victor and Alice had practiced this particular spell combination, so they both performed their roles without communicating. Alice summoned a fireball, increased its size to a few meters in diameter, and held it over her head. After attracting the flesh tree's interest as all their eyes turned to her, She hurled it at the middle one. Nice defense, but can you dodge this? She sneered as the void-empowered orb sailed through the sky. The flesh tree seemed to foresee its impending doom as it tried to sacrifice its titanic branches, the sound of wood creaking as the branches that could belong to a world tree swung in the way and evaporated in the fireball's path. The void affinity simply deleted all it came in contact with, although the fireball deflated in size with every impact. Luckily Alice had made it large enough as it reached the main body after blasting through over 10 branches. The flesh tree shut its vertical bark eyelid as a last-ditch attempt. But to Alice's relief, the fireball evaporated the scarlet mana shield, punched straight through the eyelid, and exposed the floating eye below. Alice then saw in her void eye the shadow of Victor sneak through the gap before the flesh tree's mana shield repaired itself. What occurred seconds later was the flesh tree's realization that Victor was inside its eye as it pulsated before exploding in a brilliant explosion of pure white. Genus didn't waste a second and dive-bombed through the explosion. Steaming hot sap splashed them as they soared through, but both Alice and Genus's mana shields kept them dry and safe from the heat. By the goddess! Alice shouted as she looked over her shoulder and saw the smoldering mess of the flesh tree begin to regrow. Are they even killable? Ancient Devourer defeated. EXP awarded to all party members, contribution has been calculated at 10%. EXP awarded, 10% of total gain. Wait, we killed it! Alice exclaimed as another screen appeared before her eyes. You have reached level 100. Evolution to High Human has commenced. Chapter 38. Midas Touch. Victor was a little taken aback when all of Alice's magic ceased, including her flight and mana shield. She had been gliding just above Genus's back as she slammed into him with a disgusting crunch. Despite her high stats, Genus was traveling at over 100 miles an hour as they raced away from the flesh trees behind them and toward the next floor's tower. Her face mashed into Genus's scaled back with the force of a semi-truck, and her ragdoll body rolled off his wings with blood trailing from her broken nose as she plunged to the ground. Although the group had passed the 1,000-meter-tall flesh trees behind them, there were still thousands of smaller ones between them and the next tower. As Alice descended, a surge of vines rose from the swamps like flesh-hungry vipers awaiting the falling snack. Victor would have dived down to help somehow, but a dense ball of mana suddenly surrounded Alice. It was so thick that he could see the mana as it became a solid turquoise substance that enveloped Alice like a bubble. What's happening, Genus? Victor asked the most magically inclined creature he knew, although Victor's mana detection skills were excellent due to how mana affected his life force, like detecting a coming storm due to lower wind pressure or smelling something from far away. Unfortunately, he severely lacked knowledge related to mana since he never used the stuff. Nevertheless, despite his lack of knowledge, his system somehow converted his life force into mana and did all the spell casting for him. Evolving, Genus replied with a grumble. And not a good time for it. The mighty noble dragon flared his maw and unleashed golden hellfire upon the numerous flesh trees dotting the swampy lands below. We need to protect her while the evolution occurs, he growled as his body began glowing with power. Mana danced across his golden scales in myriad rainbow streaks. His wings spread out to their maximum wingspan, and then he opened his mouth and commanded in an ancient tongue that Victor's language ability helpfully translated for him. Greater reality manipulation, Midas touch. Genus then flapped his mighty wings, and golden flakes rained down upon the land. Victor made sure to float out of the way as he was far below the dragon. Hey, interesting. This spell is the first time I've encountered such a wide area attack. It seems I continue to find new counters to my stealth skill every week. The golden flakes slowly cascaded down like snowflakes on a cold Christmas morning. Unfortunately, the vines seemed oblivious to approaching ancient dragon magic and surged upward anyway, and every time a golden flake so much as grazed past a vine, it shattered its mana shield and turned it into a piece of golden artwork. Wow, Victor mumbled as he watched many miles of swampland transform into a golden paradise. Genus's spell didn't even spare the flesh trees from the onslaught. The seemingly harmless flakes punched through the dense red mana shields of the flesh tree and transformed their black bark into pure gold. I suppose the main counter to this spell is the long wind-up time and how slow the flakes move, Victor noted as he watched the devastation. Despite how overpowered he found the flesh trees to be for only floor 50 monsters, he had to admit the inability to move made them weak to many spells and tactics. If I didn't have to bring anyone with me, I could just stealth and float right past these flesh trees and blast a hole through that wall or use spirit movement at maximum power to slip right through. While watching the unimaginable display of magic occurring before him, a thought crossed Victor's mind. Why didn't you use this spell before? We could have saved countless hours. Although Genus heavily focused on casting his grand magic, he still managed to sneak out an answer through clenched teeth. I will need to rest for 3 days after this spell finishes. If not for Alice going through an evolution, I wouldn't dare use a spell that leaves me so vulnerable. Victor groaned. That was never good news, especially with the noble dragons hot on their trail. Hopefully, the flesh tree wall will provide us with some time, but if all the noble dragons can unleash some crazy spell like Genus is right now, then we might be in trouble. He entered the Black Sea. Within his mind, he then focused on the many undead critters dotted around the previous floors. Those dragons should be approaching the 47th floor tower. He had managed to raise a few flesh trees as undead, making them even more sinister than before. However, apart from being surveillance, an unmoving, undead tree lacked usability. Victor felt his view warp as he used one of the many features of his maxed-out Raise Undead skill and looked through the eye of a flesh tree. He had only used this spell once to scout out the delving party back in the Cursed Forest, and that had been through a humanoid creature, a goblin. Taking over the perspective of an eldritch tree with a hunger for flesh was far different. He could feel the world around him through the roots and buried vines. He had felt a similar sensation when he used to go to the beach and bury his toes in the sand. That's tolerable, but what the hell am I supposed to do with this point of view? He forced the flesh tree to open its bark, and the light blinded him briefly. Okay, so the flesh tree's eyes are very vulnerable to light. That is interesting to know. The sap surrounding the eye made the view blurry, like looking underwater or through a pickle jar, but he could make out the shadow of dragons flying overhead. All right, they are about a day's travel behind us. He cancelled the view and returned to his main body. His eyes wandered across the landscape. The next floor's tower loomed over them a mere mile away. Surrounding the tower was a grey swamp with bright red flesh trees around a few meters tall dotting the landscape. Their willow branches twisted and turned as they focused on Alice with red, alien eyes. A perpetual fog blanketed the land, and with the wall of titanic flesh trees that they had just broken through surrounding the tower in an enclosing circle, Victor felt somewhat trapped. A shrill scream brought his attention back to Alice. Bubbles rose from her mouth as she thrashed around. Her eyes were wide open as the mana bubble shifted from a lovely turquoise to a grim black. Is this normal? Victor asked the rainbow dragon 100 meters above his head. The mana-coating Genus began to falter, and through the cracks in the beautiful rainbow sheen, Victor saw something. Is that his bare skin? Where did his scales go? Oh! He watched in horror as Genus concluded his spell, and as the rainbow mana dissipated, he emerged as a completely white lizard. It reminded Victor of those hairless cats people used to own back on Earth. He consumed his scales to produce that spell. Were those golden flakes, perhaps, his scales? He felt those questions were more suited for another time. Genus seemed beyond exhausted as he hung his head low, and even his mana shield flickered out of existence. The dragon shifted his head with great effort and observed Alice. His eyes danced in their usual crystal brilliance as he spoke. Yes, that is normal. Evolution requires the body to be rebuilt. The evolved version of a species is not even comparable to the original. In fact, they are so different they can't even mate with their previous species. All right, sure. But why has the mana turned black, and why is there pink floating around there now? Genus frowned as he scrutinized the rapidly changing ball of mana. Not only had it become a deep black like a starless sky, but now streaks of pink were streaking through it like shooting stars, blooming into roses. And then, the mana bubble began to expand rapidly like the sun does before collapsing and going supernova. Is that also normal? Victor questioned as he hovered backward. The mana bubble devoured all it came into contact with. Alice had fallen close to the floor before the mana bubble had appeared, so it only had to expand a little before it began consuming the golden landscape left in the wake of Genus's spell. As the bubble greedily swallowed the golden land, flakes of gold were added to the mix and floated around, turning the mana bubble into a snow globe of golden flakes and pink roses. That can't be good. Chapter 39. Human Mana Blob. Evolution complete. Alice awoke on a hardwood bed with those ominous words dancing in her vision. She rolled her head to the side, and the words followed before flashing once and then vanishing. She blinked in confusion. What the? She glanced around the simple wooden hut she was lying in. Hell happened. Why am I in a hut? She quickly pushed herself up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and stood up. No pain. If the information about her evolution was accurate, how did she feel better than ever? I expected at least some muscle ache after evolving, but I feel fantastic. Alice straightened her back and let out a satisfying groan as she stretched her arms over her head. Feeling refreshed, she surveyed the hut. It was a simple single wooden room with a door, a bed with no cushion or blanket, and a window shutter. Nothing else. Wait, shouldn't it be dark in here? To her, it was only a little dim, but the distinct lack of an open window meant she was definitely using some type of magic. How curious! She looked down at her body and gasped. She brought her hands up to her chest. No way, apart from the obvious shock of being completely naked, she saw notable improvements in her figure. She brought her hand up for inspection and found her nails had extended a little more and were still pitch black. Damn, these look sharp now. She could practically see the sheen on the blade of her nails. With some hesitance, she poked herself and felt no pain. Hey! She pushed harder and harder, her pale skin, which looked so delicate, held strong until it finally gave way, and the tip of her nail dug in. Still no pain. It was a surreal experience for her body to act so differently. Wait, why is no blood coming out of the wound? She inspected the small hole in her hand, but nothing was leaking. She shook her hand like a wet towel but still nothing. Alice knew many of her questions would be answered if she opened her status page, but she almost didn't want to know. Come on, Alice, it can't be that bad. It's not like you transformed into a demon overnight, right? Just open it. The command was on the tip of her tongue when the whole hut shook, not like an earthquake, but rather like how a ship crests over a monstrous wave on the open seas. She stumbled back and fell onto the wooden bed as the whole hut tilted and swayed as if it were suspended. What the? Alice said while gripping the bed for support. So far in her life, this was the most bizarre few minutes after waking up she had ever experienced. As the hut finally stopped swinging, she heard a monstrous roar that shook the hut's flimsy walls. Okay, this is getting ridiculous, she said as she stood back up. Status. Before her page appeared, a flurry of log messages flashed past her eyes. Congratulations, mortal, for reaching level 100. Creating a summary of your life for optimal evolution. Race: human. Classes: Friend of the Void Black Mage. Apprentice Merchant. Blessings/affinities. Darkness Void. Hidden titles. Pink Demon, bestowed by a noble dragon. You are of an unknown race in the system database. Basic improvements based on analysis commence. Mortal body, basic mana body. Incorporating blessings. Basic mana body switch to darkness affinity. Void affinity cannot be safely added. Creating unique skill, void form upgrading subclass, apprentice merchant monarch of gold. New unique spell, inferior Midas touch. Name, Alice race. Body, darkness mana body level, 100. STR, 118, Dex, 130, Con, 137, Int, 248, WIS, 240. Unspent points, 3, dulled emotions, blessing, darkness class, friend of the void. Subclass, monarch of gold divine mission, none skills. Class skills void form stealth v hellfire 3 ice bolt 9. Mana shield 9 float v. Mana sight 4 telekinesis 3 void I 3 subclass skills. Inferior Midas touch. Fast counting I identify I. Alice clicked on her new body type without wasting time due to the hut still shaking from continuous roars. Darkness mana body. After reaching level 100, you have shed your mortal flesh and become a being of mana. Your body is now a dense mana construct that does not require anything to function other than mana. If an area lacks mana, a high food and water intake will be needed to compensate. Your lifespan has also drastically increased. So I am some kind of mana blob in human shape? Is that why I shed no blood when I injured myself? She read over the description and nodded to herself. Apart from the darkness attribute part, it was the same as other high humans reported. Some of the high humans lived for hundreds of years. I wonder if there's a way I can obtain true immortality. She decided to think about that later and continued scrolling down the list. Oh! She put her hands on her neck and felt a distinct lack of a slave collar. Of course, once she had invested heavily in her con stat, she barely felt the metal collar, but she was officially free with the slave debuff gone. A weird feeling rose in her chest, followed by a wave of relief. That part of her life was finally over. She smiled, relishing in the moment for a second before pressing on her new class. Subclass, Monarch of Gold. You absorbed an altered reality created by ancient dragon magic during your ascension. Due to this, your subclass was updated, and you now have dominion over gold. Alice blinked many times at the floating screen. Ancient dragon magic? Altered reality? What in the goddess is this thing talking about? She racked her brain, but the last thing she remembered was helping kill one of those flesh trees and getting the level 100 notification before promptly passing out. Deciding to fish for more clues, she jumped down to the subclass skills. Why does my new skill not have a level? Does that mean it can't be upgraded like my fireball spell? She tapped the skill, and some information appeared. Inferior Midas touch. A unique skill that attempts to mimic the ancient dragon magic spell, greater reality manipulation, Midas touch. It allows the user to turn anything they touch into gold, but due to its inferior nature, it has a major side effect. Which is? Alice frowned and tapped the screen, but it refused to elaborate on the major side effect. All right, that spell is being ignored for now. But I wonder if it works with my true damage trait. She decided to test that theory some other time as she was deeply interested in what the void form skill could do. Void form. Become one with the void. Has tremendous side effects. Right. Alice rolled her eyes, swiped the screen away in irritation, and decided it was time to work out what was happening outside. She marched over to the door, but her hand paused. I have no clothes on. Darn, if only I had some weight. She realized she could use her mana shield spell at maximum strength to coat herself in darkness affinity mana. She activated the spell and felt surprised at how mana flowed out of her body from everywhere. Oh, right, mana body. I am literally all mana now. Darkness wrapped her form, leaving only her head exposed as she pushed open the door and received a face full of freezing cold air. Squinting her eyes, Alice surveyed the surroundings and was once again confused. The hut was built upon a large wooden platform consisting of many brown wooden logs side by side, fused together by ice. She could tell from a glance that the ice was the same magical ice Victor produced with his spell. Walking out onto the platform, she decided to use float as her bare feet might slip on the frost-covered logs. Evolved, but still need shoes, she muttered. Ridiculous. A large gust of wind whipping her from both sides made her look up. Two Titanic-sized dragons, even bigger than Genus, were flying overhead. Their scales had that same chrome shine as Genus, but they were black-scaled. Alice almost summoned a hellfire spell to her hand, but upon closer inspection, she noticed that many vines were wrapped around their limbs and tail and were attached to the log platform. Are they carrying this? Oh, Alice! A voice she knew all too well came from behind the hut. You are awake. Genus. Alice turned on her heel and looked up. Ah! Towering over the hut was a bone-white, snake-like creature. If not for his rainbow eyes and similar head shape, she would never be able to recognize him as a dragon. What the hell happened? Where are we? She blurted out. And why do you look like a hairless cat? Genus chuckled and gestured with a nod of his head for her to come around to his side. Then, as she floated around, he explained. I used a spell that comes with major side effects while you were asleep. Alice's blood ran cold. Both her new spells warned of side effects, one major and the other tremendous. If a major side effect turned a mighty golden dragon into a hairless cat with wings, then what would happen due to a tremendous side effect? Don't worry. Genus tracked her as she circled the wooden hut and saw her expression change. My scales grow back. Alice paused and met his eyes. Huh? They do? That's good. You look ridiculous. She continued floating while chuckling to herself. The dragon snake frowned. Luckily, they do, but it takes a while. About a week at most, but with rest, they return faster. Hence this wonderful contraption Victor built for us. Genus slapped his tail, causing the log platform to shudder. Now, this is traveling in style. We should have made one earlier, although we didn't have any undead large enough to carry me. Yeah, so about that Alice began, but Genus cut her off. While you were sleeping, we were attacked by the scouts from the noble families. Victor made hilariously short work of them, and now they serve us. So those roars? She questioned. Unless Genus had been yawning extra loud, she couldn't understand where they had come from. Take a look for yourself. Genus whipped his head to the left, and she followed his eyes. It's rather entertaining how they keep coming. Alice floated to the side and couldn't help but marvel at the view. They flew amongst fluffy white clouds. Occasionally she saw through a gap and caught a glimpse at the endless ice below. An Arctic floor? Did the roars come from down there? The clouds surrounding the platform briefly lit up as purple lightning flashed across the sky, followed by thunder. A second roar that sounded far more primal and dragon-like rang below, and through a gap in the clouds, Alice saw a smoke trail following a snow-white scaled dragon spiraling down toward the ice. Seconds later, the dragon slammed into an ice sheet with a thump she could hear even from here, causing a crater and spiderweb cracks to appear for miles. That must have hurt. Genus chuckled from the side. Alice had to agree, assuming that the white dragon was still alive. Oh, Alice! Alice stumbled back as an enormous shadowy head with many blue eyes appeared only a meter before her. Let's talk. Chapter 40. Imposter. Let's talk. Despite Victor's somewhat serious tone, Alice did not feel threatened. Instead, she felt comforted that Victor was still around. What about? She asked with a smile as she crossed her arms. Victor's many blue eyes that floated aimlessly around his shadowy mass all stared at her, but she was used to his intense gaze. Congratulations on your evolution, but are you still, you? Victor let the words hang in the air as Alice's brain froze. She felt different, sure. But that was expected after evolving into a higher life form. She took a hesitant step back and looked at her arms wrapped in darkness. Am I still me? What defines me as me? That flesh suit I was born with, or my thoughts and feelings? Do I have a soul? Alice, you need to understand. Victor's tone turned deadly serious. You may not remember how you evolved, but I do. I watched as you were ripped apart, piece by piece, until nothing was left. You died, Alice. The Alice I know is gone. You are something else, a mere mockery of her. No, 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 what do you mean I died? She stuttered as many thoughts raced through her mind. I passed out and woke up on a bed with an improved body. What is he talking about? I died? Ripped apart? What are you? Think about it. Victor floated there, and his presence weighed on Alice far more than before. In all their time together, he had never accused or threatened her over anything. Being looked at like an impostor rekindled the fact he was a void creature that could obliterate her with a single spell, and it sent shivers down her spine. Genus remained silent on the side despite the tension and watched Alice with his rainbow eyes as if looking for a single fault in her character. What am I? That thought ran through her mind in endless cycles as she stood there staring at her potential death. Her path to greatness had only just begun. She needed to convince Victor that she was still her. But how? Alice thought back on her status screen. I am a darkness mana body, she hesitantly responded. It sounded wrong now that she said it out loud. What even was a mana body? Also, her race still showed question marks on the status screen. Not even the system knew what she truly was, maybe she was some mere mockery of her past self. So the system claims, Victor persisted. And what is a darkness mana body exactly? Think about it. Is there a physical stone inside you holding that mana body together? What keeps you in that shape? If you were truly a mana body, couldn't you take any shape or form? He took a deep sigh and then continued. I always thought of the system as an add-on, an extension of oneself, and with its intervention, it could forcefully upgrade or improve a life form. But you have reached the supposed peak of evolution according to the system. You have become pure system. There is nothing of you that remains. The system is what binds you together, maintains your form. Alice just stood there stunned. She had no idea what to say. If the system vanished tomorrow, would you remain? This was Victor's concern. He was getting increasingly worried about how much authority this system had over the world. As a creature from the void, he knew his place. He was their enemy. The world and the lifeblood of the system, mana, naturally opposed his existence. My existence and origin confuse me greatly, but there may be a day I stand against whatever controls the system or the system itself. When that day comes, can you stand by my side, Alice? Will the system use you against me? Alice looked straight into his eyes. I don't know. Then do we continue? But I don't care. She ruthlessly cut him off. Whatever the system says, I am me. Whether I am a blob of mana with human emotions or my soul has been reborn, I make my own decisions. Whatever happens, I am staying right here. With you. The expression of self-doubt vanished, and she had a ruthless grin. You ask if we continue? Fuck yes, we do. That goddess has some questions to answer, and there's no better way to reach her than to bang down her front door. The goddess resided at the bottom of the dungeon. Victor couldn't help but ask. Back on Earth. The consensus was that the gods lorded over the mortals from above the clouds, but on this planet, the gods hid down below? Alice shrugged as the darkness that wrapped her form swirled around her as she hovered a foot off the wooden platform. Maybe, maybe not. It's all legends and rumors at the end of the day. No way to tell if we don't make it down there. She then grinned. Now tell me where there's something I can kill. Got some things I want to test. You know, Genus lowered his head between the pair and watched them both with his eyes. You two become more similar every day. The two exchanged a look and laughed. Then Genus gestured for them to leave with his paw. I need some rest or my beautiful scales will never return. All right, come with me. I will explain everything on the way. Victor cast his stealth skill, and Alice had no issues with following him as she activated her void eye. With a wave of goodbye to Genus, she dive-bombed off the side of the floating platform. As they shot down toward the snow dragon that had crash-landed, Victor began explaining. You passed out right as we were about to leave the 50th floor. At first, we had no idea what happened to you, but before we could do anything, you began your evolution process. I won't go into too many details, but it was ugly. Hearing about her evolution process reminded Alice that one thing had bugged her. Do you know anything about greater reality manipulation? She shouted over the wind that howled in her ears as they rapidly descended. Despite the Arctic conditions, she felt perfectly warm. I guess there are some benefits to becoming a mana blob, she thought. Yes, Genus used a spell to protect you from the flesh trees while you were obliterated by the system and turned into whatever you are now. Anyway, that's not important. What's important is that you started evolving over a week or so ago. It's hard to tell down here. It took that long. There were few records or even rumors about evolution, but due to human greed and the desire to be something greater, the tales of becoming a higher life form were widespread and often wrong. This was mainly because, much to the general population's confusion, the delvers who managed to evolve usually decided to remain and live in the dungeon. I always found that bizarre, but now I'm a mana blob, I understand my fellow mana blob people's woes. The feeling of this dense mana is intoxicating. Alice almost jiggled in excitement at how refreshing the mana on the lowest floors must be. I can also imagine how suffocating returning to the surface must feel. It's not even that nice up there, considering everyone would harass you daily for information about being a higher being. Much nicer to stay down here. Alice's wandering mind was brought back when Victor answered. Yes, it took that long. He sighed, similar to annoyed parents after a tiring outing. It was long and deep, filled with annoyance and exhaustion. Can a void creature even get stressed or tired? She thought with amusement. So there I was, with a stupid dragon that had decided to make himself useless by casting some overly fancy but ultimately pointless ancient dragon magic, and a girl that decided to die and then be reborn in a terrifying display of the system's capabilities. Not to sound dramatic, but we were surrounded on all sides by mountain-size carnivorous flesh trees and innumerable vines that were relentlessly trying to drag you away the second I looked away. Victor approached the snow dragon's corpse that had smashed a tunnel into the ice with only the tail and two legs poking out. Despite the violent impact and horrendous burn marks covering its left flank, Alice could tell from a glance that this snow-white dragon was of similar size and shape to the female silver dragon that died outside the jail cell. So they caught up to us, hey? Alice noted, and Victor nodded. Annoyingly, the dragons have been assaulting us over the last week. This is the 20th one I've killed. He materialized from stealth. Despite the dragon's leg being 3 times taller than her, Victor towered over the corpse and had to bend down slightly to touch it with his claw. Alice then saw in her void eye a giant blob of energy fleeing the corpse and entering Victor. As Victor cast his raise undead spell, he continued, in fact, they caught up to us during my 3-day battle, and it was only thanks to their corpses that I could get you and Genus out of there. Those flying platforms were easy enough to make. I just needed something powerful enough to lift them. With Genus's weight. He is one heavy boy. Alice giggled at that comment. Today had been a weird one, but she was feeling much better. Trying to ignore the fast winds that kicked up loose snow and rustled her hair, she asked, so what's next? To be perfectly honest, Victor floated back as the snow dragon's muscles spasmed back to life and ruthlessly broke itself out of the ice, getting to the bottom of the dungeon is only a matter of time. I have a fleet of undead dragons and 100 million life force to play with. My only real concern is keeping Genus fed, as it's been a week, and we have only made it down one floor, and I have seen nothing but ice. So what has he been eating? Victor pointed to the dragon's corpse. Alice held back her disgust at the idea of Genus eating his own kind and decided to change the topic. So we are on the 52nd floor then, she pondered as she looked around. All she could see for thousands of miles was flat ice with the occasional ridge here and there. Yep, it took 4 days of constant flying to traverse the 51st floor, so I suspect it will take another week for this one. I have said it before, and I will repeat it, I refuse to believe normal people ever got to the bottom of a grand dungeon. It would have taken lifetimes to cover this distance and the distance we will need to cover on foot. Who said they were normal? Alice said. The other well-known grand dungeon is in the center of the Mystic Lands. Nobody over there is normal. Victor paused for a while and seemed to be focusing on something else. Alice gave him space for a few minutes and chose to scroll through her menus again. Eventually, he turned to face her, his many eyes floating around as the newly risen snow dragon rose to its full height, stretched out its wings, and towered over him with flakes of ice sliding off its scales. Speaking of the mystical lands, he said, and Alice raised a brow. Anything involving the mystic lands was always trouble. A fancy-looking convoy bearing a flag that Toby claims belongs to the mystical realm has just arrived at the outskirts of the cursed forest.